Hello and good evening. My name is Dr. Stefan Vossen. I am a clinician that specializes in chronic low back pain, especially, and I'm also the author of the dot theory. And this is my YouTube, whatever channel, where I post discussions, it's basically me talking about things, and also others. I have a few interviews lined up that should be interesting, hopefully. And I did come here to discuss some of my theoretical thinkings and thoughts about the dot theory, which I hope makes it actually simpler to understand. This particular episode and 15 minutes of shame, I'm going to be talking, basically making a little bit of a synopsis, because I'm now 6 episodes in which that I am talking about more or less specific things, and people may find it, generally speaking, interesting to just have a little bit of a synoptic view on things at this stage. So in short, the dot theory is a theory. And theories are basically devices that we have developed in our culture, in scientific culture, to group together a set of ideas that enable us to conceptualize something. So, for example, the theory of evolution. So now when we say about Darwinian discussion around evolution, we have this understanding of how biological pressures and meteorological and environmental pressures create environments where certain biospheres thrive. And then as they then thrive, that then creates a pressure on other aspects of that ecosystem, which then causes it to morph into something other than it was before that. So that kind of theoretical grouping together, as Darwinian evolution, for example, gives us a single tool by which I can communicate to somebody else and say, no, 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 I'm talking about Darwinian evolution. And that then clarifies an extremely complicated concept that requires some education to understand in a single word, rather than, for example, having to repeat and explain the information. And ultimately, we do this with everything. So, because you don't need to have the meaning of words explained in order to understand this conversation. And so, but you did at one point. So that was then a kind of meta layer of data and information that you acquired as a young child. And then as further information became available and interaction between different components of how we understand life started to become available, you could start to understand how things became more complicated. All of a sudden, a trip to the supermarket is not just about sweeties. It is about a lot more, and might even be about work, and it might be about pressures and dealing with injuries, and it might be dealing with whatever. So all of a sudden, we understand that as we grow older with lived experience of life, we essentially deal with ever greater levels of complexity in everything. So that's what a theory is. It's an object that clusters together complex ideas that require a little bit of education. So what we've got here in the dot theory is essentially an understanding of that is a little bit complex at the moment, because we're not used to thinking in this way, that reflects on how we can look at information to make that information more interesting to us. And in doing that, when you follow the logic through and you start implementing some of the meanings of the dot theory, you start to see that you can then do that with data, and you can do that with data that describes the human lived experience. What does that mean? Those are all very big words. But what they mean is the information that Google, Apple, Facebook, WhatsApp have about you that describe how you experience life. Also, how your heart monitor is doing, and for example how you describe your life. And who do we describe our lives to? People like our GPs and the clinicians that we deal with on a hopefully infrequent basis. So we have this very interesting amount of data and information that describes our individual lived experience, and we can use that information to ask questions that are deeply, deeply relevant to our quality of life. And what that made me realize, as somebody who works in the healthcare field, is that by thinking in this way, you could potentially start identifying pathways to help patients get access to better care earlier. So essentially, almost verging on prevention. By looking at information that is available today, we can already understand a lot about how certain areas of a country might be more prone to certain diseases or problems compared to other areas of a country. And that gives us statistical probabilities of certain things occurring in certain places. So if we use those maps, we can actually almost geolocate and tag by association the meaning of information that is relevant to where you live, so that when I'm asking a question of this database system about what may be relevant to you, there will be a whole heap of, for example, healthcare based information that is associated and relevant to where you live, the kind of work you do, the kind of family history that you have. And that makes it possible to create a highly, highly bespoke type of healthcare that looks at that information that describes who and what you are, that information that is available, and then compare that to other people who are very, very similar, and people within that group who had very similar problems in the past. And then from the pool of information that describes problems that people had in the past and treatments they received, we can then identify treatment pathways that are most likely to help you. So that then becomes a suggestive pathway. So what's really, really fascinating about the dot theory as a concept is that it's actually a theory whose output comes as a suggestion. It comes as an offer of help rather than, for example, an answer, which would be something that would be more in the realm of diagnostic tools. Now, by changing the focus on from labeling a disease, giving it a name, and rather looking at the processes that produce that disease, then we can come to far more interesting conclusions about how to help somebody, because we have the database. We have already lots and lots and lots of information, oceans of of information about people and the probability links with things like, for example, disease and metrics of well-being and quality of life. Because governments worldwide have collected such data, organizations have collected such data forever. And that information then suddenly becomes highly relevant in predicting and enabling statistical probability links to be created. And this is where the dot theory comes in, because it's an opportunistic theory, like all theories, really, because they really just emerge when the time is right. They emerge as a byproduct of the tools that have evolved and been produced in the previous generation. That is the reality of these things. And so, for example, I've been looking at a lot of research over the last few months and years, as you can imagine. And what I've noticed is that the database, the information about quantum entanglement, the understanding of reality, the involvement of consciousness in understanding reality, and even conversations amongst theoretical physicists who are starting to come to the conclusion that really you can only look at reality from the point of view of the singular individual observer, i.e. you, or in this case, me, because I'm looking at myself in this camera. And that then means that you have a very interesting perspective on reality and shared reality, to be more specific. And that is that it is never correct. And this is where the dot theory comes in as as a logical argument, because it really doesn't need to prove anything. What it's saying is that we can with confidence say that shared reality, or the notion of shared reality, is not real. Simply because shared reality is made up out of a collective average that exists in absolute from each observer's point of view. And yet we create this average, and therefore inherently there's always an element of unknown. There's always an element of fuzziness that is integral to that. So when we take the point of view of trying to understand an object in space, for example, which would be interesting from a theoretical physicist's point of view, we are trying to pinpoint exactly where in three-dimensional space something is and what it is doing with what kind of energy signature, etc. Again, these things may sound a little bit heavy, but it's just about knowing what's where and what it is doing at any given time. And that is extremely helpful when you're trying to help people, when you're trying to make life better for one another. You need to gain understanding of what your environment actually means and is doing. And the dot theory, as a computational device, does exactly that for the human lived experience. Now, admittedly, when it starts to get into computing using the dot theory mechanisms, the theoretical physicists' reality, then that becomes somewhat more complicated. And that's where, for example, quantum computing will come in, which ultimately is only a couple of years away. So realistically, the solution for even the theoretical physicists' desired understanding of reality is already in the making if you then dovetail quantum computing within the dot theoretical data management system. So sadly, again, if you don't know what quantum computing is and what all these kind of terms mean, don't be scared. They don't actually mean a great deal. They're just another way of coming to a conclusion, coming to understand what something means. What that means in itself is really quite simple. It's like how Spotify knows whether you're going to like the next song. And these are calculations. These are algorithmic calculations where that they look at behavioral traits, things that you like about the previous song, or things that link the songs that you tend to like, or the time of day that you tend to like certain songs, so that the algorithm itself is able to give you an enhanced musical experience. And that level of bespoking is essentially what we're talking about. But instead of looking at music as an output to be liked, we are instead now looking at it from a experience that would be liked. And that is what the dot theory, in a nutshell, offers. So, what does all this have to do with math and theoretical physics and all the rest of it? Well, this is the problem. It's a theory. It's a type of theory that is a little unique, and this is problematic for me to say out loud because it's such a sought after thing that is so important to so many people that I find it personally really difficult to even say that I think it's right. But go with me, because at the end of the day, if I don't believe it's right, then it's not going to come out onto the scientific marketplace. And if I don't believe it's right, then nobody will be able to either pick something up of it, from it, and hopefully develop it further where that is wrong, or hopefully at the very least inspire somebody into thinking of a better way to solve the same problem if I turn out to be wrong about it. But at the moment, I really believe that is correct. And by discussing it like this, I can present it to people so that it can be discussed more widely, that it can be brought to the attention of the scientific community, because they're not really looking for this, in the sense of they're desperately looking for this, but they're not looking at it the way that I did. And that is a very unusual thing to do, the way that I looked at it. But this is also a very unusual theory. So that's why it all feels very strange, looks very strange, and is very strange. And I describe it as odd, as an experience I've gone through. But I'm trying to share it with people so that they can relax into it, let me know what they think, and perhaps give me some pointers towards how to correct and make it even better. Thank you very much for your time tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening. Part 2 coming up shortly.